So, Donald Trump is president. Congratulations to Americans and to America and to anyone who was supporting Trump and wanted him to become the president. I'm one of those people myself. I thought he was a much better candidate than Biden, better than Kamala. And I thought, moreover, that he was the right choice at this point in time because we need to shift towards a direction of truth and away from a direction of make believe and lies, which is something I want to talk about. Now, some people will immediately point out that there are a lot of things that Donald Trump has lied about, and there are a lot of issues around his court cases, all of these things, and I'm not going to contest any of that. When I talk about truth, I'm not talking about what he specifically is saying or doing. I'm talking about the truth in society in general. A good example of this would be his executive order to ensure that male and female are defined as biological sexes and that gender ideology is removed from the federal government fully. So that's an example of what I mean by the truth, because we've just had several years of gender ideology, gender pronouns, all of this nonsense, this garbage that, quite frankly, just made life harder for most people because you had to remember the right pronouns. And then in some jurisdictions, if you got the pronoun wrong, someone could take you to court. And underlying all of this was this insistence that biological sex wasn't really a thing and gender was fluid. And it's just complete garbage. And in the end, I think it caused a lot of problems, especially in athletics, where you had men competing against women or boys competing against girls, and in places like prisons, where you had men being sent to women's prisons. And then, of course, problems came out of that, right? Unsurprisingly. So when I talk about truth, I'm talking about those sorts of things, these sort of general truths. I mean, it's actually insane that in 2025, a government has to issue an edict that actually says that men are men and women are women. It's crazy to me, but that's the time we're living in. So truth is something that's really important. And I think truth has been the biggest casualty of the last 10 to 20 years, especially in Western Europe. And I think about Keir Starmer, the Labour Party, and actually the Tories as well. So a lot of the problems, or actually all the problems we face, are because we're unwilling to face the truth. Whether that's the truth about how Britain is no longer a global power and therefore is at the mercy of other powers, Hong Kong being a good example of this, or it's the truth about how net zero isn't really going to deliver what Ed Miliband thinks it's going to deliver, or the fact that we should actually have built nuclear power stations and we should be building them because that's how we're going to solve the energy crisis, the electricity problem in the UK, or the fact that we have a problem with Islamic terrorism in the UK, and we have had for years. So Axel Rudakubana, that kid, that murderer who murdered those three girls in Southport, the fact that he was an Islamic terrorist was covered up by the authorities, including the Labour government. An unwillingness to admit the truth and face the truth. Why? Because they're afraid there are going to be riots. Crazy thing is, there were riots anyway, because people suspected there was a cover-up, and people were right about it. The other issue about the Pakistani rape gangs, this is an issue that's engulfed politics in the UK in recent times. And the main thing about this is actually the unwillingness to face the truth. Again, people can pin the blame on the Pakistani community, they can pin the blame on the police for not doing enough, or social services, or the Labour councillors in all these towns where this happened. But if you kind of zoom out from all of it, yes, the blame can be apportioned, but if you zoom out, what you see is this unwillingness to face the truth on behalf of all of these people. None of these people wanted to face the truth and admit the truth and deal with the truth. And that's why this problem persisted. I mean, first of all, taking the Pakistani community, why is it that a lot of these gangs were predominantly Pakistani men? What's the reason for that? Is it a cultural reason? I think it is. But is that because culture has degraded to this point? Or is it because the culture was always going to lead to something like this because of how culture in Pakistan is? I don't really know the answers, but I want people to talk about this. And I want people to talk about this openly so that we can find out the truth. But people aren't willing to do that. In fact, what we see is this insistence that there's absolutely nothing wrong and that anyone who criticizes this is a bigot or a racist. And what about the authorities in this case? What about the Conservatives? What about the Labour Party? What about Keir Starmer? Why don't they deal with this? Why don't they want to launch a national inquiry into this? What are they so afraid of? So I think the first truth that needs to be admitted is the fear that so much of what happens in the country today is just based on fear. The inaction, it's because of fear. The actions they take because of fear. It's all based on fear. So if you think about it, We're just a very fearful culture at this point. And a fearful culture is a culture that cannot face the truth and cannot deal with the truth. It's difficult to admit that there's a problem with an ethnic minority group in the country and that that needs to be spoken about openly. People don't want to admit that. People don't want to admit that there are problems with multiple ethnic minorities. Why? Because then it questions multiculturalism. It questions the fundamental ethos which has been guiding all of these politics for all these years, right? And people don't want to face that truth, that there's something wrong with that, or that that policy was done badly, whatever it is, right? So I see that there's this inability to face the truth, and ultimately that's what's causing all of these problems. Bad things happen, people do bad things, but why aren't we dealing with those things? And why do those things keep persisting? Why have the sort of the rape gangs been operating for so many years? Why has these been going on for so long? It's because people haven't dealt with it. Why haven't people dealt with it? Because they haven't been able to admit to themselves the truth of what's going on. And I think any society that isn't able to admit the truth or deal with the truth is ultimately going to fail. Because if you can't admit the truth, then you can't identify the problem. If you can't identify the problem, you can't find a solution and you can't apply a solution. So how are you ever going to fix it?